Oscar's income dried up at the source. His books were withdrawn from sale. No one went to see his plays. Every shopkeeper to whom he owed a penny took immediate action against him. Judgments were obtained and an execution put into his house in Tite Street. Within a month, at the very moment when he most needed money to fee counsel and procure evidence, he was beggared and sold up, and because of his confinement in prison the sale was conducted under such conditions that, whereas in ordinary times his effects would have covered the claims against him 3 times over, all his belongings went for nothing, and the man who was making £4,000 or £5,000 a year by his plays was adjudicated a bankrupt for a little over £1,000. £600 of this sum were for Lord Queensberry's costs, which the Queensberry family, Lord Douglas of Hawick, Lord Alfred Douglas and their mother, had promised in writing to pay, but when the time came absolutely refused to pay. Most unfortunately, many of Oscar's manuscripts were stolen or lost in the disorder of the sheriff's legal proceedings. Wilde could have cried with Shylock, "You take my life when you do take away the means whereby I live." But at the time 9 Englishmen out of 10 applauded what was practically persecution. A worse thing remains to be told. The right of free speech, which Englishmen pride themselves on, had utterly disappeared, as it always does disappear in England when there is most need of it. It was impossible to say one word in Wilde's defence, or even in extenuation of his sin, in any London print. At this time I owned the greater part of the Saturday Review, and edited it. Here, at any rate, one might have thought I could have set forth in a Christian country a sane and liberal view. I had no wish to minimise the offence. No one condemned unnatural vice more than I, but Oscar Wilde was a distinguished man of letters. He had written beautiful things, and his good works should have been allowed to speak in his favour. I wrote an article setting forth this view. My printers immediately informed me that they thought the article ill-advised, and when I insisted, they said they would prefer not to print it. Yet there was nothing in it beyond a plea to suspend judgment and defer insult till after the trial. Messrs. Smith and Sons, the great booksellers, who somehow got wind of the matter, through my publisher, I believe, sent to say that they would not sell any paper that attempted to defend Oscar Wilde. It would be better even, they added, not to mention his name. The English tradesmen's censors were determined that this man should have Jedburgh justice. I should have ruined the Saturday Review by the mere attempt to treat the matter fairly. In this extremity I went to the great leader of public opinion in England. Mr. Arthur Walter, the manager of the Times, had always been kind to me. He was a man of balanced mind, who had taken high honours at Oxford in his youth, and for 20 years had rubbed shoulders with the leading men in every rank of life. I went down to stay with him in Berkshire, and I urged upon him what I regarded as the aristocratic view. In England it was manifest that under the circumstances there was no chance of a fair trial, and it seemed to me the duty of the Times to say plainly that this man should not be condemned beforehand, and that if he were condemned his merits should be taken into consideration in his punishment as well as his demerits. While willing to listen to me, Mr. Walter did not share my views. A man who had written a great poem or a great play did not rank in his esteem with a man who had won a skirmish against a handful of unarmed savages, or one who had stolen a piece of land from some barbarians and annexed it to the empire. In his heart he held the view of the English landed aristocracy, that the ordinary successful general or admiral or statesman was infinitely more important than a Shakespeare or a Browning. He could not be persuaded to believe that the names of Gladstone, Disraeli, Wolseley, Roberts and Wood would diminish and fade from day to day, till in 100 years they would scarcely be known, even to the educated; whereas the fame of Browning, Swinburne, Meredith, or even Oscar Wilde would increase and grow brighter with time, till in 100 or 500 years no one would dream of comparing pushful politicians like Gladstone or Beaconsfield with men of genius like Swinburne or Wilde. He simply would not see it, and when he perceived that the weight of argument was against him, he declared that if it were true it was so much the worse for humanity. In his opinion, anyone living a clean life was worth more than a writer of love songs or the maker of clever comedies. Mr. John Smith worth more than Shakespeare. He was as deaf as only Englishmen can be deaf to the plea for abstract justice. "You don't even say Wilde's innocent," he threw at me more than once. "I believe him to be innocent," I declared truthfully, "but it is better that 100 guilty men go free than that one man should not have a fair trial. And how can this man have a fair trial now, when the papers for weeks past have been filled with violent diatribes against him and his works?" One point, peculiarly English, he used again and again. "So long as substantial justice is done," he said, "it is all we care about." "Substantial justice will never be done," I cried, "so long as that is your ideal. Your arrow can never go quite so high as it is aimed." But I got no further. If Oscar Wilde had been a general or a so-called empire builder, the Times might have affronted public opinion and called attention to his virtues, and argued that they should be taken in extenuation of his offences; but as he was only a writer, no one seemed to owe him anything or to care what became of him. Mr. Walter was fair-minded in comparison with most men of his class. There was staying with him at this very time an Irish gentleman who listened to my pleading for Wilde with ill-concealed indignation. Excited by Arthur Walter's obstinacy to find fresh arguments, I pointed out that Wilde's offence was pathological and not criminal, and would not be punished in a properly constituted state. "You admit," I said, "that we punish crime to prevent its spreading. Wipe this sin off the statute book and you would not increase the sinners by one, then why punish them?" "I'd whip such sinners to death, so I would," cried the Irishman. "Hanging's too good for them." "You only punished lepers," I went on, "in the Middle Ages because you believed that leprosy was catching. This malady is not even catching." "Faith, I'd punish it with extermination," cried the Irishman. Exasperated by the fact that his idiot prejudice was hurting my friend, I said at length with a smile: "You are very bitter. I'm not. You see, I have no sexual jealousy to inflame me." On this Mr. Walter had to interfere between us to keep the peace, but the mischief was done. My advocacy remained without effect. It is very curious how deep-rooted and enduring is the prejudice against writers in England. not only is no attempt made to rate them at their true value, at the value which posterity puts upon